2008 Toyota Avalon passenger side inner CV boot. I'm Brian Essick from How To Automotive. I'm going to show you how to replace that. We're going to start by getting the car up in the air and getting the front wheels off. And if you're doing this at home, you need to jack it up by with floor jacks and jack stands over here on the body, and you want the suspension hanging. So next we're going to just remove the axle nut. I'm going to use my impact gun. Now that you got the axle nut off, the next step is to remove the three bolts and nuts. There are two nuts and one bolt actually holding the lower ball joint on. Now that we got the bolts off, what we need to do is we need to pry the lower control arm down. So what I'm going to do is turn the wheel to the right like this, and now I'm going to put a pry bar in here where this little hole is on the bottom of the control arm. So I'm going to stick a pry bar in there. Lower control arm down. And wiggle the strut. Normally what we do is we push our axle nut through and pull the strut and assembly out, but the axle nut itself is frozen in the hub. So what I'm going to do is use my my OTC hub puller here. So with this OTC hub puller here, what you do is you mount it up with a couple lug nuts on the studs, and then you mount these ears on there as a little slot that allows it to slip on, and then what you're going to do is you're going to rotate this nut inwards, and what it's going to do is it's going to push the axle through. Now that the axle's through, I'm going to remove my tool. Okay, now that the axle's pushed through, what I'm going to do is pull the strut assembly and pull the axle out of the back. And I need a little bit more room, so what I'm going to do is I'll remove the 12mm bolt here from the brake hose, and that'll give me just enough room to clear the axle. Now that the axle's out, what I'm going to do is take my little tie down here and hook it on my rack. And I'm going to pull the arm out of the way, so when we work on this, we'll have a nice clean area to work with. So now we have ease of access to get the axle in and out of the car. Okay, so now we're going to be underneath the car. So we need to squeeze this little, these little snap rings here. We've actually not little, large ones. So I'm gonna use a pair of pliers. I'm gonna squeeze these and pop this ring out of this keeper. So when you get the snap ring out, it'll look like this. It'll just hang loose like this. Now what you're gonna do is take a pry bar here and pry the axle out completely. Now that we've got the whole axle assembly out of the car, I'm just going to go ahead and just cut these clamps off here and here, and go ahead and just cut the boot off and separate the two axles, the inner and the outer half of the axle. Now that the clamps are just cut off, I'm going to just use a razor blade and make a slit down it and just cut the boot off. So now that I got the boots off and the axle separated, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just take some rags and clean out the inner side of the boot, the inner axle, and then what we need to do is we need to remove this this bearing plate from the shaft to get our new boot on. And these bearings will pop off like this, so you can go ahead and just pop them off like that and set them aside. And just I like to kind of just so I know how they go back on, I like to keep them in the kind of orientating it on a rag like this, where I can just flip them back on. So this one will go like that. So I'll take all three of these off, and then I'll clean this all up. And then there's going to be a snap ring on the end here. We'll need to remove that, and with a brass hammer we'll hit the end of the shaft here with a brass hammer and knock this off the shaft. Alright, after getting all the bearings cleaned up, all the grease off of it, I went ahead and removed the snap ring, and I just used my snap ring pliers like this. And, so I took it off the end, and now what I'm going to show you guys is if you look on the end of the axle, they have these little hash marks. And that indicates, so when you take these off, when you take this off, you want to line, each one of these, once you don't want to rotate it like this, so you want them to match up the little hash marks like this. So it's not going to matter if, you know, this one doesn't have to go to this one. You just want the end of it oriented like with the hash marks. So now I'm going to use my brass hammer like this. And what I'm going to do is put it in a vise and smack it. Actually, this one's coming off pretty easily. So I'm just going to smack it in the end like this until it comes off. Okay, now that the this part of it's off, we're going to take our new band clamp, slide it on. Then we're going to take our new boot after matching everything up. We're going to slide the boot on. So after sliding the boot on, I slide it on all the way, and when later on I will slide it up to the final position and before we put the clamp on. So I'll slide it on all the way. Now we're going to put this back on, and we're going to line up those little hash marks on the top here. So it'll look like that. And also when I took this off, I laid it down where I could just put it straight back on. I didn't flip it upside down or anything. It may not matter, but I just like to do that to keep everything go back the way it was. Now we're going to put the snap ring back on. So the snap ring is back on. Now we're going to take it and we're going to put our bearings back on. So we'll just flip them back on the way we took them off, like that, and press them on. All three of them. Now I'm going to take my grease container or packet that came with the boot kit and fill this pocket up full of grease. Now that it's full of grease, I'll slide the bearings back, the two axle shafts back together. I'll push them together, and then once they're fully pushed together all the way in, then I'll slide the boot up over the over this boot, and I'll put the outer clamp on. And this clamp, in my case, it comes apart. But if yours clamp style doesn't come apart, you have to put it on before you put the axles together. Now I'm going to take my clamp after the boots are together, and I'm going to put my clamp around it. Now they have this little hook on the end of the clamp. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide this like so, as tight as I can get it by hand inside the groove here, and then I'll hook the little hook that's on here in here, and then I'll use my my clamp pliers to tighten it. So when you get the clamp all set up, it'll be like that, and it's pretty tight by itself like that. But now what we're going to do is take these pliers here, and we're going to put them on our clamp here, and we're just going to give them a squeeze, center it up and give it a squeeze, and that tightens the clamp up fully, crimps it onto the axle shaft. Then we'll take the inner part of the boot and line it up with our little grooves here. So once it's lined up like that, then we'll do the same thing with the inner. This comes apart too, and it's the same style as this one. And you'll tighten it up by hand, so squeeze it. And I try to make the clamps line up with each other, just how I do it. You don't have to, but so you'll tighten it up by hand, and once you got it tightened by hand, you'll use the tool and you'll squeeze it. And if you don't have that, you can use side cutters from the side and squeeze them, but it's better to use the tool. Okay, now that we got our boot back on, we're going to take our axle assembly and slide it back through the suspension and back into the transmission. And then after that, we'll reattach our snap ring here with our pliers. And when you handle it, you want to be careful not to pull it apart like that. You want to kind of keep it squeezed together. So I'm going to slide it through and get it in the ballpark. And then I'll do the final slide through from underneath so I can line it up and watch everything. So now I just got the axle kind of in there about where I want it. So now I'm going to use my left hand, and I want to guide it. I don't want to nick this seal when I put it in. So I'm going to guide it in with one hand and then push with the other. And then this bearing here will remount into this little bracket here. So you got to kind of hover it and float both of them. Okay, now that that's in, we need to get the snap ring back into place. And you can either try to squeeze it and use your fingers and push it back in, or what I found that works a lot of times is if you kind of start one corner like this at an angle, and then use a screwdriver and push on it one end, and use your fingers like this to push it in. That works pretty well too. Now that my axle's reinstalled back into the transmission, we're going to go ahead and stab it back through the hub here, like so. And I'm going to go ahead and just remove my my strapping here, and just we're going to slide it through. And what I like to do is, once it's stabbed through, I like to start the axle nut on this side, or if it just slides through easily, just because you may have to use the axle nut to pull the axle through. And but if it slides in easily, you don't have to put it in. And then you can then what we're going to do is we're going to pry this arm down again with the pry bar setup, and then we're going to put our 2 studs here over the top right here, and then we'll start the bolt from the bottom and tighten it down. Now that I got the axle shaft stabbed through the hub here, I'm going to take a little blue thread lock and put it on the bolts. A couple dabs of the thread on the threads here, and that'll prevent the bolts from vibrating loose and backing back off. It's Permanex is the brand. I have this available on my website at howtoautomotive.com, and all the tools that you see me using in the video, they're also available at, on the website at howtoautomotive.com on the tools and product page. So I'm going to put a few dabs of this stuff on the threads here, and also on the nut that went on here. Then I'm going to take my control my pry bar and stick it back in the control arm like this, and I'm going to pry the arm down and swing and push everything in like this and line everything up. And then once I get these on, I'm going to torque these bolts down to 80 foot-pounds. So I'm going to start the 3 bolts and nut, the 2 bolts and the 2 nuts and the bolt, and I'll tighten these down to 80 foot-pounds. I'll torque them down. Okay, now that the ball joint is torqued down, I'm going to go ahead and remount my brake line cable here with the little 12mm bolt and tighten that down. And then after that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the axle nut on. We need to torque it down to 217 pounds. Okay, one thing I wanted to point out is the axle nut's 217 pounds. It's very important that you get this torqued right, because the squeezing of the axle itself is what holds the bearing together, and if you don't get this set right, it'll prematurely wear the bearing out. So I'm going to run it in with my impact gun and get it snug, and then what I'll do is I'll put the wheel on. And when I go to put the wheel on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the center cap out, and we're going to torque the nut through the hole here. So take the center cap out, put the wheel on, and then you can torque these down to 76 foot-pounds. So I got the wheel on, and I just ran the lug nuts in with my impact gun until they're snug. I'm going to lower the vehicle down, make sure it's in park, and then we're going to torque the lug nuts first at 76 foot-pounds, and then we're going to torque the axle nut at 217 pounds. And then after we get it torqued down on the axle shaft here, you'll notice it has a slot in here. Well, on the axle nut right here, what we're going to do is we're going to, after we get it torqued, let's ping it in and make it a little indentation. And then what that does is prevent the bolt from loosening back up and backing off. Okay, to ping in the little notch on the axle nut, I'm just going to use my impact hammer here with a little chisel bit on it, and just kind of put it on there real quick and give it a quick little hit. If you don't have this, you can just use a hammer and a chisel. Pinged in, you're just going to put your cap back on, and that'll complete the inner CV boot on the passenger side on a 2008 Toyota Avalon. I'm Brian Essick from How To Automotive. I also wanted to remind you that any of the tools or products that you see me use in this video are available at howtoautomotive.com on the tools and product page. I'd like to thank you guys for watching.